Japan is a nation of incredible achievements and wondrous technology. Many people look at it as almost a world of the future, and yet there's a dark underbelly to this country that many outside of it are not aware of. Critics of Japan will often say that it is something of a fake country, built upon a bunch of social rules that constrict people from talking about what they really think. Everyone in Japan is an actor in a sense, fitting into a specific social role that they've been ordained to fill. It's a society, some would argue, of insincere people who are all simply trying to get ahead by deceiving others. Furthermore, many say that it is an exploitative society, a society which drains people of all of their life force in the pursuit of business success. Much is made of the Japanese salaryman working incredibly long hours at a company only to go back home to a family that he barely ever sees. Women, many would argue, are still treated as wives first and anything else second, leading to women fearing marriage. In this kind of climate, who wouldn't fake to get ahead? Who wouldn't become something that they aren't in order to escape the drudgery of everyday life? But lo and behold, the entertainment industry, the career of the superstar, is not one to be envied either. In Japan, more so than anywhere else, we see the commodification of the celebrity. The Japanese actress, in particular, the hardest hit. She must not only be an actress, but also sometimes a musician, an idol, and, if opportunity calls for it, something of a prostitute. Those familiar with the Japanese entertainment industry know that there's not really a strong divide in some cases between performing artists and the realm of pornography. Of course, the realm of the performing arts has always been likened in some way to prostitution, and, of course, the Japanese film industry is more tightly tied to the production of pornography than perhaps some others are around the world. What you make of this is ultimately your own opinion, and I'm not here to convince anyone of anything one way or another. I certainly don't know enough to actually comment on these issues. However, my goal today is not to comment on Japanese society, but rather to comment on a commentary of Japanese society. And this leads me to today's topic, Murakami Ryu's book, Audition. Audition was first published in 1997, and it became very well known across Japan very quickly. However, it gained international fame through the 1999 film adaptation. The film adaptation, directed by Miike Takashi, became very famous for its violent depictions of, well, graphic abuse. The graphic depiction of torture and violence led to it being considered a cult classic and a great representation of extreme cinema in some respects. But I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. This book is not a horror novel. Is it disturbing at times, especially close to its horrible climax? Yes. However, for the most part, this work is a satire and a character study. A character study of some very interesting characters, I might add, people who epitomize the Japanese of the late 1990s. Let me set the stage for Murakami's Audition. We are approaching the end of what is known as the Lost Decade in Japan, a time of incredible economic stagnation. We have to remember that this was a time when Japan, as the world's second largest economy, seemed poised to take over the world or become one of the dominant powers alongside the United States. Unfortunately, by 1990, it had become clear that Japan was not going to reach this lofty goal. Decreases in asset prices caused the Japanese stock market's values to plummet, and GDP growth became absolutely dismal in Japan in the 90s. In this period of terrible economic uncertainty, many began to fear that the country would backslide. This air of desperation leads to a situation where people will do just about anything they can to get ahead in life. Chances of traditional success in the Japanese economy seem to be fleeting, and people are becoming desperate for any way that they can to secure their own future. Just as Japan has lost a great deal and is staring into an uncertain future, so it is the same with our main character. We follow a producer named Aoyama who is still getting over the death of his wife 7 years prior. Aoyama's teenage son, Shige, suggests that he go and find himself a new wife, suggests that his father move on from the previous marriage. Aoyama isn't against the idea, but he does have reservations. Namely, he doesn't think that he'll be able to find a woman of good enough quality compared to his late wife. He also might not find one that's so forgiving of his indiscretions, such as his numerous affairs that he had during his prior marriage. Aoyama's problem is that he knows he'll never find a woman just like his last wife Ryoko, so he hasn't even made the attempt. He ends up talking it over with his friend Yoshikawa, who is a film producer now. And he decides to use his connection in the film and media industry to put together a plan, an audition for a movie, The Heroine of Tomorrow, which will actually be used to screen candidates for marrying Aoyama. The potential to create a film and make some money off of it would simply be a bonus for the two of them. During the auditions, Aoyama finds that only one of the women out of thousands of auditions actually interests him. The essay of one Yamasaki Asami speaks to him, and it turns out that she is a woman of incredible beauty, more beautiful than practically any star actress, and she isn't vapid or simply searching after fame. She seems like the perfect woman. Aoyama invites Asami to come and dine with him at some very wonderful upscale restaurants, all the while downplaying his own tastes, pretending to be something of more of a common man. However, Aoyama's friends keep objecting to the woman. Something is not right about her. Elements of her backstory are unraveled by Yoshikawa and by others. For example, it turns out that one of her old mentors that she talks about mysteriously passed away. One time while they're dining, Aoyama sees a man in a wheelchair, someone who seems to be perhaps an amputee, who gets very nervous upon the sight of Asami. As Yoshikawa does some digging, he finds more and more inconsistencies with this Yamasaki Asami character. As his friends bring objection after objection towards him, Aoyama is so enthralled that he finds a way to ignore all of their warnings. What's worse is that this Asami girl seems incredibly good at playing the game. As Aoyama tries to seduce her, she gives just the right amount of resistance, just enough to get him to feel even more in love than he was before. As it will turn out, well, Aoyama is faking being a rich man to impress his future wife. Asami is playing a game with him as well. She is also not who he seems. Under the veneer of a perfect woman lies a cold, calculating psychopath. We'll learn that Asami comes from a horribly abusive household and that she is the result of an unloving family. She has been scarred so much from her past life that she now believes that practically all men are irredeemable, and she finds ways to take her revenge upon her stepfather by proxy against other men. To get Asami's love is simple. A man only has to follow one rule: to love her alone and not anyone or anything else. It is a test we will find that men before Aoyama have failed. Murakami is not subtle with the foreshadowing in this novel. We basically know exactly what this woman is planning to do to Aoyama and how she's going to do it. We know that she wants to destroy him in some way. We know that it's going to involve cutting off his feet. It's not really a horror story, nor is it a slow burning mystery. So, why does it work so well? Well, what Murakami is really good at is showing how passions work and how they can delude the human mind. Aoyama is giving every single clue that we as the audience are given, and we can see that his friends are trying their darndest to convince him that it's a terrible idea. He shouldn't be trying to get with this woman. He should just let it go. And indeed, he has many opportunities to let it go. He could just simply not call this woman anymore. He could simply not go and see her anymore. At one point, when he confesses his love to her, she even runs away from him. This would be the perfect opportunity to get out, to stop. But Aoyama can't stop, and I don't think any of us in his situation would be able to stop either. He's allowed himself to be ensnared not only by a woman who is incredibly physically beautiful, but who has created an image of herself that appeals to him perfectly. The fear of losing her, of missing out, the fear of losing a fantastic opportunity is too great for him, even when the signs are showing him that this opportunity doesn't really exist. The tension of this story is really in the dramatic irony, in some sense. We are being told both by the narrator and also by other characters that what Aoyama is doing is foolish and dangerous. The question for us as we read is not really what is going to happen, but how far is it going to go? We want to see if our protagonist is going to survive this encounter in the end, or whether he's going to lead to his own demise. The story is incredibly fast-paced. You can read this story in just a couple of hours, but what it does so well is it so interestingly portrays dialogue between various different characters with Aoyama, as well as his own interior thoughts. It's done in such a way that it never gets boring. By the end of the story, I found that I was definitely on the side of Aoyama. Even knowing the plot from knowing what happens in Miike's film, I was rooting for this guy to make it out alive. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the themes in this story. The whole point of this story is to be a satire. It's telling us something about Japanese society as a whole. Now, what is it telling us through this story of basically a crazy girlfriend? Well, let's go back closer to the beginning of the story when Yoshikawa and Aoyama are having a discussion before the audition. Aoyama has specified that not any kind of woman will do. He's not looking for someone vapid. He's not looking for someone chasing after money or fame. The two of them meet in an upscale nightclub. Yoshikawa and Aoyama comment on the nature of the women who are working there, and Yoshikawa has some interesting things to say about the kind of women who work at the club. No bimbos! Ever since the bubble burst, the only women in the ruined clubs of Ginza are the sorts of nitwits who look like they just climbed down from the pole in some disco, right? Hostessing in a place like this is actually a fairly wholesome way for a struggling artiste to support herself. Yoshikawa is, none too subtly, saying that in the entertainment industry, especially in the post-boom 1990s, it's akin to prostitution. But his comparison of being an actor to prostitution goes even further, because we now switch to the interior thoughts of Aoyama, and we get to hear what he thinks. Sitting in a studio, sizing up a row of 15 or 20 swimsuit-clad hopefuls, he'd always found words like slave trade and auction block popping into his mind. Of course, they weren't slaves, but there was no denying that the women lined up on that little platform, posing in their bikinis, were trying to sell themselves. Buying and selling was the basis of all social intercourse, and the commodity an actor or model offered for sale was nothing less than her own being. It's so interesting here that Murakami decides to talk about offering up the being. As an actress, the actresses aren't offering up just skills or their talent, they're offering up themselves in a more holistic way. Or, more cynically, we could say that offering up their bodies is the most important part. Actresses are treated like a commodity. They are a product and they are selling themselves. They are selling their bodies, in a sense. They have become prostitutes. And we're going to see how this unfolds during the audition. During the audition itself, we see several scandalous displays by women hoping to get the lead role in Aoyama's film, Tomorrow's Heroine. Many of the actresses show clear signs of mental instability. Others come with managers in tow. All of them seem absolutely desperate to land the part. One of the women claimed to be a psychic and offered to describe the guardian spirits attached to both of them. Aoyama's turned out to be a painter who died young, and Yoshikawa's was a flying squirrel. A number of the women insisted on dancing for them, and one began shedding clothes as she did. A girl still in her teens spoke at length about her tumultuous sexual history. One had taken a plane all the way from Hokkaido just for this audition, and proudly told them that she was known as the queen of the discos in Sapporo. We see here that the women are doing something that you might see in a strip club, right? One of them is stripping nude in order to dance. Some of the other ones are dancing, even though it seems to have nothing to do with the role that they're auditioning for. And we have some, quite disturbingly, talking about their sexual history. Once again, we see a very close connection between acting and prostitution, at least for Japanese actresses. The sheer number of applicants, 4,000 by the time of the auditions, tells us that there might be something wrong with Japanese society, just a little bit. Here we see thousands of them auditioning for a role in a film project almost no one knows anything about, except for a radio show that acts as an advertisement for it. These women aren't just showing up to audition, they're trying every trick in the book to either overawe the producers or elicit some other kind of reaction. Many of them are leaning heavily into their sex appeal, acting like, I think Murakami implies, prostitutes. Indeed, what is Aoyama doing here, if not trying to get women to prostitute themselves to himself and his friend? After all, of course, he's looking for a mate. The allure of fame, mixed with their relative powerlessness in this society, leads these desperate women to do whatever they can to gain the man's favor. And yet, Aoyama, ironically, is only interested in women who aren't seeking after fame, and we'll find that there might be an ulterior motive to this. So let's talk more about the characters and what they represent. We'll talk about our protagonist, Aoyama. Aoyama is a wonderfully crafted protagonist. He's this bizarre mix of sympathetic, pitiable, and repulsive, in my opinion. We can start with his relationship with his wife, Ryoko. Yes, it's clear to me that he has feelings of fondness and love for his past wife. But in my opinion, his feelings are also far from pure. Let's look at how Murakami establishes this in the text. It says, Aoyama had nothing but love, respect, and gratitude for this remarkable wife of his, and yet it is also true ever since his days at the agency that he'd been rather extravagantly unfaithful to her. The most critical instance had occurred just after the Jesus video took off, when he got engaged with a nightclub hostess to the tune of millions of yen. But even then, Ryoko had maintained her cool and her quiet dignity, and no serious fights ever occurred in the home. We gather from this section that Aoyama loved that his wife was quiet and submissive in the home. Remember, he didn't just cheat on her and squander the money that her wealthy father had helped Aoyama attain, he cheated on her numerous times, and Aoyama is thankful that she just didn't make a scene about it. The Jesus video referred to is one of Aoyama's greatest successes. He's made a living off of selling videos and equipment to Christian churches across Asia. Aoyama also successfully conned a master pianist into performing for free in Japan, all under the ruse of being a devout Christian himself. So, what do we know about Aoyama? He's an unfaithful cheat and a faker, hardly sympathetic in this regard. He is very, very comfortable with lying to people, and he really likes submissive women who won't complain when he betrays them. However, he's not entirely irredeemable, because if there's one thing that is real in Aoyama's life, it is his love for his son Shige. And we see quite a few situations wherein he does show real affection for his son. In fact, real adoration for his son as well. And I feel like this is very important to the narrative. But we'll continue. Aoyama's a massive fake. He faked being a Christian, he faked being a good husband, and he also fakes his wealth. When he is dating his hopeful next bride, Asami, he is constantly bringing her to upscale restaurants, all the while pretending to be a humble man. But the thing is, Aoyama isn't rich, at least not anymore. Yes, he has connections to his wife's rich family, but he himself doesn't actually have that much money. Shige points out that his father drives a normal sedan, but back when he was married, he drove a Mercedes. While Aoyama is dating Asami, he only brings her out to fancy restaurants, all while trying to convince her that soba noodles and Chinese food are better than sushi and steak, almost trying to prime her for the disappointment that will come once they get married. Shige tells his father, "Have you told her that she won't exactly be living a life of luxury? That there's no family fortune to speak of, that you don't own this house, for example, or that your car is made in Japan instead of being a Mercedes or something?" Aoyama has been a fake for years, with the audition just being his latest and greatest scheme. In fact, the man even deceives himself with his own intentions. He's constantly talking about how he wants a woman with substance, when I think what he really wants is a woman that won't cause problems for him. He doesn't like women with particularly strong personalities. We're giving hints throughout the story that Aoyama has ulterior motives. He's tired of the vapid nature of modern Japanese women, at least, those who are in show business. He's tired of women who stretch out the vowels at the end of their words or fill sentences with meaningless interjections. In other words, he seems to dislike Japanese valley girls. However, we can definitely see that his preference is mostly for women with weak personalities. Part of his attraction to Asami is that her body evoked a kind of perilous fragility that made you feel as if things were on the verge of collapse. In one sense, he's attracted to the anxiety that being next to this woman causes, but we need to remember that the anxiety is caused by her own seeming frailty, that she might fall apart, and maybe that he'll be there to pick her up afterwards. Of course, when Aoyama ends up in bed with her, he finds that this fragility was all a ruse, and he becomes the submissive one in the relationship. As for Aoyama, we can definitely see that the passion that he feels, really the lust that he feels for this woman, has made him blind. He ignores obvious signs that this woman is bad news. Asami's mentor at Victor, Shibata Hiroshi, turns out to be a lie. Yoshikawa reveals to Aoyama that he died a year and a half ago. Later, it's revealed that he died of a heart attack. Later still, as Aoyama is committing to marrying this woman, it is revealed that Shibata died of a heart attack while having his legs sawed off. This is the biggest red flag I think I've ever read in a book, but at this point, Aoyama ignores all of it. I think that these elements are actually maybe a bit too obvious, but this is intentional because it's proving a point. Aoyama's seeming idiocy here is all about the all-consuming nature of passion, and in this case, of lust. And it's interesting that what he is lusting after is mostly an image that he himself has created. One of Aoyama's friends, a former geisha named Kai, mentions that Asami seems to be like smoke. You think you're seeing her clearly enough, but when you reach for her, there's nothing there. If we look at Aoyama's interactions with Asami throughout the novel, almost all of them are dominated by Aoyama, talking about things, while Asami mostly sits there praising every one of his opinions, mostly agreeing with him. Asami only interjects or pushes against him when Aoyama is saying something that will draw him closer into her trap. Again, if she pushes back a little bit, she makes herself a bit more interesting, a bit more intriguing to him. She predicts that he will fall further into her trap, and of course he does. Aoyama falls in love with a mirage that has been perfectly made to seduce him. The woman that he loved is just a figment of his imagination, his desires reflected back at him by this predator. But it's not all bad for Aoyama. He's definitely capable of bursts of heroism. For example, he tries to prevent his dog Gangsta's death, RIP to a real one there, by begging Asami to kill him instead of the dog. We're inside his house. He's paralyzed with a drug that Asami has slipped into one of his drinks, and now she is preparing to kill his dog in a very similar manner to how she treats men by cutting off the feet. His first reaction on realizing that she was going to murder him was not, strangely enough, terror, but the sort of feeling of closure one has upon finally solving a puzzle. We notice that Aoyama is kind of capable of looking beyond the immediate situation, not just panicking in fear, but really figuring out what's going on here. He even comes to kind of accept that his death is going to happen. He kind of even accepts it as a little bit of karma. However, another part of him has a desire to fight for his life, and understandably so. Aoyama hasn't done anything deserving of death by the end of the story. He fights against his attacker, and he almost succeeds in killing her by kicking her down the stairs. At the end of the day, he seizes on the opportunity to get his son to kill the intruder as well. When Shige unexpectedly returns home and comes to see his father with one foot taken off of his body, limping slowly, or rather crawling slowly up the stairs while being pursued by some mysterious woman, Aoyama yells to his son to run, attempting to save Shige's life. But when it becomes clear that Shige can no longer run, Aoyama also gives him the order to kill the woman. In other words, Aoyama is still able to look out for his son, even in this moment of intense stress. As for the conclusion of Aoyama's character arc, it's a brilliant one. Asami and Shige go toe-to-toe, with Asami trying to spray Shige with some mace. Shige's able to dodge out of the way and throws a jar at her head, apparently concussing her, or the fall down the stairs probably concussed her previously. Anyways, this gives Shige enough time to pull out a combat knife, a gift from father to son that was given to Shige mainly because of his love of the Rambo movies. And this, of course, gives him enough time to finish off Asami. Asami dies, repeating the word liar over and over, and Shige asks his father at the conclusion of the novel what this meant. This is how the discussion goes. Shige, wait, yeah? She kept saying something. Yeah? What was she saying? Liar, liar. Just one word over and over. What was this all about? I don't know. Nothing, really. And yes, of course, this line can be considered to be a sardonic little commentary on the author's own work, as this story or the events of the characters' lives might have amounted to nothing, right? It's a story about nothing. More importantly for me, though, is that it signals the inability of Aoyama and men in general to admit fault. Granted, I don't know if I'd want to tell my son about the details, especially while I'm still partially paralyzed. But as a symbol, this line shows that Aoyama, even after his divine retribution, has not changed his ways. He's still a liar, just as Asami says, and he doesn't change at all. I'll note that the term divine intervention and divine retribution were thrown around much earlier in the story, and in some way, Asami's actions represent divine justice of a kind on Aoyama for his unfaithful ways. Yes, of course, she's also a real person with her own goals, but she might also be, in some ways, a punishment sent from the gods upon our main character, at least in a figurative sense. And now let's talk a little bit more about our antagonist. She's the product of terrible domestic abuse, abused by her uncle's wife at one point, and then later by a stepfather, who must have committed unspeakably awful acts. She even bears cracked toenails from her time doing ballet, suggesting some kind of overwork and further abuse. It seems almost every man in her life was abusive to her. In the story, Asami famously says, "I'll give you everything, but I've got to be the only one you love. Do you understand?" Of course, Asami, in my opinion, is already planning Aoyama's murder. She knows in some way that this directive that she gives men is an impossible task. This statement is a ruse, an attempt to justify her coming acts of violence. She kind of reminds me of Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. She has a code that she needs to follow before she abuses, tortures, and ultimately kills men, or at least severely injures them, as she does appear to have at least one man who survived her. And also similar to Chigurh, she kind of comes off as a force of nature in this story. Although she is a product of real abuse, she's not a mere human, at least not in the narrative sense. She's described in supernatural language far too much, and she really does appear in too convenient a situation in this story. Previous mention of divine retribution got me thinking that she is, at least symbolically, a tool of the gods to wreak vengeance upon men. We've already gone over the many sins of Aoyama that would deserve this kind of retaliation. Let's talk some more about Asami's features. She's impossibly beautiful, more beautiful than any movie star or model. She nonetheless seems to be repulsive in some way to those other than her target. Yoshikawa, Kai, Takamatsu, everyone Aoyama talks to seems to be able to sniff her out. Out of 4,000 applications, hers alone seems to catch his eyes. Although this could be explained through coincidence, it really does feel like there's something supernatural going on here. I've talked at length about how Aoyama is a fake, and of course he ends up getting taken in by another person's con, in this case a psychopathic serial killer. And yes, I do believe that Asami is a psychopath. There's not much else that justifies her behavior, and there is a curious outburst from her when she's young that could justify this interpretation. At the age of 4, Asami is at her father's funeral when she begins laughing at the priest trying to shoo away a wasp. "I bowed my head and just kept giggling and giggling, and I guess everyone thought I was having some sort of breakdown. But my mother's new husband was watching all this. It wasn't long after that day that he hit me for the first time." And yes, this abuse is horrible, and it's not justifiable. But it should be noted that Asami's actions at the funeral are very abnormal for a child of this age, who would likely be crying profusely at the death of her normal father. I don't think there's any indication that her father was abusive. Asami's problems seem to start when she's taken away from her, well, deceased father. Then later in the story, much later near the climax, we have this description of Asami as she approaches Aoyama as she climbs the stairs after him to cut off his legs. It contradicts earlier statements that she seems to be approaching things emotionlessly, as she giggles maliciously as she's about to attack this man. She takes joy in it. She's not simply robotic. However, we can't just claim that this character is, well, born evil, or is also an elemental form of evil. These could be true, all in some kind of sense, right? As she could be born a psychopath, she could be, symbolically a form of destruction sent by the gods. But we've also got to note the trauma aspect of this. Well, Asami's psychology might have been different from birth. It was constant abuse during her childhood that gave her an admittedly incredibly shallow reason for killing men. Asami becomes, in the words of Aoyama in another context, a human being constructed entirely of wounds. Not time, or history, or ambition, nothing but wounds. The face of a person who could probably kill someone without feeling anything whatsoever. So having described the two main characters, I will go into some comparisons to the film here. The film and the novel are fairly similar. The film definitely developed more moments of horror and brutal torture. There's a guy with stumps where his feet should be. Instead of just the guy in the wheelchair, we get a guy who's stuck in a bag, trapped in a bag, made to eat vomit, and so on. However, there is also a difference in the conclusion of the film. Specifically, it's how Shige ends up killing Asami. So, in the film, we see this version of Shige kill Asami in self defense by kicking her down the stairs and breaking her neck, seemingly not trying to cause her death, just accidentally killing her. In the novel, Aoyama actually shouts a command to his son, telling her, "Kill her, kill her." Shige then proceeds to use a combat knife that his father had bought him earlier to kill Asami. Why do I think the novel's ending is much better than the film's? I think that it's very important that this woman was killed intentionally by Shige. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, Shige and the love between him and Aoyama are the only legitimate thing in Aoyama's life. The true love that he has for his son, in some ways, is embodied in that combat knife, that gift that he gave to his son, knowing that his son is a fan of Rambo movies. It really does seem like, in some way, for all of the karmic punishment that Aoyama has received, he gains a karmic reward in his son. It's almost like that true love in his life protects him from the deception, protects him from the negative consequences of his deceptive acts. There's this element of familial love that Aoyama was saved by his good actions. Earlier on, we saw that Aoyama took care to always bring his son on trips with him, and that he truly enjoyed conversing with Shige, who had a way of grounding his father in reality. His love is paid back, in a sense, by his son coming to protect him. And again, I think this works because Shige doesn't run away. He's not running away from this woman for his life. He is fighting back and saving his father. All right, moving on to the conclusion. So I've talked enough about this story and why I think it's a really, really effective satire and a fantastic character study. Of course, I hope that you've read it before, but if you haven't read it now, it would be a good time to go out and read it, or at the very least, watch the film adaptation. Audition, first and foremost, is a story about fakes. It's a story about what it means to live a fake life and the consequences that come from that. It's a critique of a very fake, very image obsessed society. Japan of the 1990s, arguably Japan even today. In the end, however disturbing this book and its conclusion might be, it really does end on a powerful moral message that the true things in our lives and the true relationships that we forge with other people are what will ultimately deliver us from suffering. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of Audition. I certainly enjoyed reading this novel. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I am hoping to get into Murakami's other works a bit later on. But for now, I hope that you give this book a look, and I'll be seeing you again soon.